Hello everyone, it's Mr. G, and today I'm going to bring you lesson 9 in the Java beginner tutorial. And what is lesson 9 going to be? Well, you probably saw it in the YouTube title already, but it's going to be on switch statements and for loops. The other kind of for loop that I owe you that I never went over in our loop lesson. So let's crack straight into it. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of that. I'll keep this just in case we need it, but let's go ahead and start learning about this for loop. So just a quick review. When we do a normal for loop, we type the word for, and then we put some kind of index in here. We set it to a thing, and this is what we use to loop through, like we use to track the loop. And then the next part is our condition. So while I is less than or equal to 10, and I plus plus, this is what we do after we execute the code. We increment I by 1, and our loop body is, let's just say we um, print out I. All right, and when we run this, we get 0 through 10 down here. Simple, easy, condensed code there. Pretty good, pretty powerful stuff. Now, there are times when we can actually make this even more condensed and concise. So let's learn about that with this other for loop. So I'm going to get rid of this. Now, let's say we had an array. Let's say it's a list of names. So let's create a string array because names would be a string, and we'll just call it names. And let's instantiate this directly. So let's put some names in here. Let's say Monique. Let's say Tiffany. Um, John. George. Old school name there. Um, Tim and Rachel. All right, so we have 6 names. We'll just go with the 6. Doesn't have to be a super long array there. Now, let's say we wanted to go through this whole array, loop through it, and just print out the names. We can use any of the loops to accomplish this, but the for each loop is clearly the best choice here, and I'll show you why. So to do this with a while loop or a do while loop, I'll just use a while loop here. First, we have to create an index. All right, so we'll set that to 0. And we need this because the while loop doesn't have any indexing built into it. So there's the reason for that. And it needs to be 0 because we want to start at the 0 element, which is the first one. Remember, computers start with 0. And so then we need to do our while loop. So while index is less than, and we're going to use a variable, and it's like a method that's built into arrays, and it's the length array, and do our curly braces there. And so this method just returns the number of elements in the array. And so we know it's 6. It's going to be 6 in this case, but this is better than typing 6 because if we change this, this will automatically adjust with it. So it's instead of going through your code and finding every time you put in a 6 for this, um, you could just use this and it would be better. So anyway, while index is less than the length of this, so 5 will be the last element, and this 5 is less than 6. But once it hits 6, it's going to break out of the loop. So then we can just print out. That's not what I wanted. Print out names, and in our square brackets, we're going to put index. All right. Index is the position that we're going to pull from the array. All right. And then can't forget to increment our index. So the position actually changes and we can eventually break out of the loop. We don't want an infinite loop here. And when I run it, we get Monique, Tiffany, John, George, Tim, and Rachel. All right, 6 names in the order that we said. Okay. Now this is 4 lines of code. Um, it's not too bad, but we can do a little bit better than that. So let's try a normal for loop. So for, let's do j this time. While j is less than names dot length, j plus plus. All right, now that we're in the loop here, we're gonna just do this, copy that, paste it in, and then we can't use index here because we're using j. So I'm just gonna replace index with j there, and let's actually just do a space. So if you want to print a blank line, or just to give some space, you can just do an empty print statement and it'll do that for you. And when we run it, this is the output from the while loop, and this is the output from the for loop. So same output, but now we have it in 3 lines of code instead of the 4 lines. So okay, now the for each loop is going to be the same amount of lines as the normal for loop, but it's still less typing. So the way that we would do that is type for. Now, what data type are these names? They're strings. So we have to put that data type first. So for string, so for each, this is a for each loop. So for each string, and we're going to have a temporary variable that we're going to store each string in. So we're going to put that as S here, and we're going to put our colon. This is just the syntax of the loop, so just follow me for a second. For each string S in names, names is our collection of data here, this array, then we're just going to print S. And that's it. That's all we have to type. For each string in names stored in this temporary variable, it just, every time it loops, it goes to the next one, puts it in this variable, and then we print it out. Then we go back to the, if there are more strings, then it'll continue to do it, and it'll iterate through the whole list. So let's save it and run it, and we get the same output, and this is way less typing. It's essentially 1 line of code and like a couple words. It's basically 2 lines of code. It's pretty preferable in my opinion when it comes to something where you just want to print something or you want to access all the things in a list. Now, there are some downsides to the for each loop, especially when compared to the other for loop. So we already talked about the positives. It's much quicker to just set up and type and code. But the 2 downsides are the first one being you can't access any kind of like you don't know what position in the array or whatever kind of list you have your current element is with this kind of loop. So not directly anyway. So if you wanted to know, like here in this for loop, we have this j variable, which is our index essentially, which is it's what we're used to track our position in the array. We don't have that in here. We're getting rid of the intent is to eliminate that with this kind of loop. But if there's ever an instance, where you want to know the position on the list, this for each loop is not the loop for you. The typical for loop is better because that information is just built into the loop. So that's the first disadvantage of the for each loop. The other disadvantage is if you're making changes to the objects or the elements in the list, then you're gonna at time you can get an exception. I believe it's called a concurrent modification exception or something like that, and it'll crash your program. So we don't want that, and for some reason that I don't know, the normal for loop can handle that, and the for each loop cannot. So that's the gist of the for each loop. So again, you a lot of things in Java you read as you would in English, or it's close. So we know that this is a for each loop, so you have to read it like that. For each string in names, print out the string. I don't think that's too bad. This one you can't really read, the normal for loop you can't really read like that. But there are other things that you can, like if statements and things like that. So that's the for each loop. And I think I'll actually leave that there. So now we also need to talk about switch statements. So what is a switch statement? A switch statement is another type of program control, and it's like a condition that you set up, conditional statement, very similar to if statements. And you use it to allow your program to make decisions for you. So let's say we had a character variable and it's first name uh, initial, I guess. All right, and we're gonna set that to let's say F. Okay. All right, so we have our character here. Now this could be something else. This, normally in a program you wouldn't just directly set it like this, but just bear with me. We're just gonna set it to F. Okay. Now, if you wanted to test, you know, if its position in the alphabet kind of thing, you want to test like, okay, if, you know, first name, initial, blah blah blah, and then you have to do, else if, and then you have to do one for each case, and that's just really not the best way to go. Now, switch statements are, like I said, an alternative. And so let's just say you want to test which character you have in this variable. It could be G, it could be, M, Z, whatever. So you would type switch here, and you notice it turns orange. And in the parentheses, you type what you're switching on. Like what are you testing? What is the condition that you're testing? So we are testing first name initial, so whatever this is. And then we put our curly braces and our error goes away. So depending on what the contents of this is, we can do stuff. So the difference between a switch statement and an if statement is we don't do any ifs or else ifs or anything like that. We type out cases. So we're going to put case. And now because it's a character, we have to use single quotes. So let's say A, and then we put our colon there. And then we type underneath this case, beneath this case, or to the right of it. Some people do it that way if it's one line of code. We type what we want to do. We'll just, do the normal, what we do here. And first name initial. Okay, and then now with each case that we type here, so let's just do a B. And it is case sensitive, so I'm gonna make sure. Alright. So let's do A, B, and C. Alright. And then that's the end of our switch. Alright. We're gonna come here and we're actually gonna get no output because our input doesn't match any of these cases. So let's actually just comment this out. All right, let's run it. So as you can see, we get no output because it's F. Now, if I change this, I'll change it to B. Change it to B. What do you think is going to happen? I think most people would say that it's gonna see, okay, it's B, so it's gonna go to A, see that A is not the same thing, so it's not gonna do this. Then it goes to B, sees it's gonna do that, and goes to C, and that's not correct, so it's just gonna print out B. I think that's reasonable, but that's actually not what's gonna happen here. It's going to print out, well, you'll see. It printed B twice. Now, why did it do that? Well, because it, what we do in these cases is if we want to separate them out, to break out of the switch, we have to put the break statement, and we didn't do that. So it came to A, saw that A was that wasn't it, so it just went to B, and it printed out the first name initial. Now, because we didn't break out here, and the first name initial is B, because that's what we set it to, it goes down to the next one and is going to execute that code. So in order to fix that, we really would put a break on all of them. And as you can see now, it broke out of the switch statement. And the switch statement is everything in between these curly braces. Okay, so now you don't have to put a break under the last case, but it's a good practice to do it. I always do it, just especially if you possibly add something in the future. So just gonna add a break here, add a break there. All right. Now you might be wondering, hey, that's only A, B, and C. Well, we can do, one, like each letter here, but that really isn't better than an if statement or a bunch of if statements. I mean, it's slightly easier to read, for sure. It definitely is, but um, switch statements are good because it can save you some time and some typing. So what we might want to do is these cases each represent an if or an if else, like a specific case that we're testing for. We also have the default case, which is our else statement from an if. And with that, we can just type something, we can do something else. So let's just go ahead, do this, and we'll type your letter does not matter. Okay. Now, because I'm biased here, I'm going to add one more case for G. Okay, and let's make it G, capital G. All right, and when we run the code, it prints out G, right? Because that's what we expected. It goes here, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Oh, this is right. I'm going to do this, and it broke out. If I took the breakaway, as we just discussed, we get the other output as well. So again, we have to make sure we have our breaks. Now, if I made this letter J, it's just going to output your letter doesn't matter because it doesn't match any of these specific cases. Now, the cool thing about switch statements is that, because so far there's not really much of a difference from if statements. The cool thing about this, though, is you can put multiple cases in one line. So let's say you wanted to do A, D, L, I don't know, let's say O, all right, and then you might print, so you might print something like, these are good letters, and the period is supposed to go before that, okay, and then for B, C, I have C already, X, Z, Q, let's take B out of this, and let's make this J. And you might say, these letters get you a lot of points in Scrabble. Okay, and say C R S, whoops, T V. I don't know. Just say something random here. So and we can put the best letter because it is. Let's do an exclamation point. All right. So now we can test for a lot more cases with a lot fewer lines. And if you were doing this in an if statement, you can put all of like a case in the same line, but I'll show you how it's different in a moment. But let's run it now. So we have J as our first letter, first name initial here, and when we run the code, it's going to go through these and pick an option. These letters get you a lot of points in Scrabble. Now, it printed that because that's here, because the case J, X, Z, and Q is true. First name initial, which is what we're switching, what we're testing, is the value of it is J. So it falls into this category here. And then because we typed break, because we put our break here, it breaks out of the switch, and then it'll, continue to do whatever code is after that, if there is any. Now, if we put, T here, say something random, it prints that because T is part of this case. And we did G before, and if I did some letter that's not there, like P, we're going to say your letter doesn't matter because that's the default case. That's our else in the switch. So if I wanted to do this in an if statement, this is going to be a lot of typing. So let's toggle this off. And so we wanted to say if first name initial equals, remember we have to do double equal signs when we're testing for equivalence in Java, and we have to do our character here. So A, or first name initial equals D, or first name initial equals L, or first name initial equals O. Those are the four. And then we would do this same thing. Now we don't have to type break. All right, and then we would do else if. Let's copy this. And so we have J, X, Z, and Q. So this is a lot of work, as you can see. It's a lot of work. We have to do these Boolean operators here. We have to type the variable name every single time. We don't have to do that here. So it just saves us some work. But we can continue to do this. And this is with me copying and pasting and making things go a little faster. All right, let's get rid of that. Put this in there, and we have C, and we're actually going to need another one because this one is 5. S, T. We have or first name initial equals V. All right. And we have to do one more else if for G specifically. Equals G. Then get rid of that. And then we're going to put this in there in the print statement. and then else, because that was the last specific case that we're checking for. So all other cases, we're going to do this output there, and we save it and we run it. And J, your letter does not matter. Oh, it's P, sorry. We changed it. So it's P. P is not any of these specific ifs or else ifs. It's not in any of those conditions to test. So it defaults to the else. If I wanted to do G, well, the best letter, because we had a case specifically for that. So I much rather would code like this than like this if it's a lot of things you're testing. Now, my general rule of thumb is I will use if statements if there's only up to 3, sometimes 4 things that I'm checking for. So if, or like if there's a total of 4 choices, so it's, an if, 2 else ifs, 1 or 2 else ifs, and then an else, then yeah, I can do something like that. But otherwise, I'm going to use a switch, because especially if there are multiple like inputs that can lead to the same result, then you can just put all of them on the same line, and it's so much better, so much easier, and it's much more, to me, it's more readable than this. I know you can format this differently to maybe make it more readable, and different people have different ways of, reading these things and formatting their code. But switch statements are better for certain situations, and other times it's just easier to set up in if else. So that's all for today. The next time we are going to be going to some more intermediate level things, but that's pretty much all for the basics of Java right now, like the super basics. You have a lot of the fundamentals now. You understand data types, you understand what a variable is, you know how to have your program make decisions with if statements and switch statements. You know how to create collections, a collection of data with arrays. You can loop through them, through those collections, and get the information. You know how to use random objects and use the scanner to get input from the user now. So there are a lot of things that you can do now. You know how to make methods and how to make your methods do exactly what you want, getting the information out of them or changing information in the program to get the desired output. So I have faith that you guys can take these building blocks and make some pretty cool stuff. But the stuff that we're going to be learning next will elevate it even more. So we still haven't fully utilized the power of object-oriented programming, which is what Java's an object-oriented programming language. We've used a couple of objects, like I said, the scanner and the random object, but we're gonna start creating our own objects more. We have this animal class that we haven't touched in a while, and we can make objects out of this, but we haven't fully used this yet because there's some principles that can make these objects more powerful. So until next time, y'all have a good one.